Ladies and gentlemen, angry Americans worldwide, I am very, very pleased to bring you an important, soon to be iconic, and definitely inspiring guest that is very timely given what's going on in the world events. Yep. The great and powerful James Laporta joins us here in New York.
I don't know how much of that is true, but thank you. It's a very lovely introduction. Thank you.
Welcome to the Classic Car Club.
Thank you.
You drove here.
Yes.
Which is very difficult.
In a Buick.
In a Buick?
In a Buick Regal.
Wow.
I love those cars.
And you drove from Florida?
Yeah.
Where you live?
I live in Delray Beach, Florida, among the retirees. I love them. Although, not to get like too morbid, but like the only thing that like the downside is like when like a new house goes on sale, it's not because they moved. It's they're at the end of their life, so that's the only like downside.
Because they moved on.
And yeah, and so I've always been like a little trepidatious to like meet any neighbors because it'd be like Tuesdays with Maury turning, over and over again. But other than that, I love it. It's very quiet.
Is that how you get the Buick Regal? Because Buick Regal.
Yeah. I wanted to blend in. I didn't want to stand out. It's got all like the features where like the backup camera and all that kind of stuff.
Well, that's the exception. You've been standing out a lot in your work. We're going to get into that in a second. But I ask every guest to choose a cocktail. Right. And you have chosen something that I love. And tell our audience what you've chosen and why. Please.
It's a gin and tonic. It's simple. I don't know if this is true, but I had a buddy who is former CIA, and he told me that, and again, I don't know if this is true, but they get taught to drink gin and tonic. So when they're having to like elicit intelligence off people, but they have to also be seen like drinking and stuff like that, they drink gin and tonics because they can still sort of stay in the game, and then they might, pay off the bartender, to like water it down a little bit.
Wow.
But from what I'm told, gin and tonic is like what newbie CIA officers were taught when going through the farm.
Gin and tonic, the drink of spies.
Yeah, the drink of spies. Yeah.
Cheers. Welcome. Great to have you here. Gin and tonic is also what my grandfather used to drink.
Really?
I feel like gin is an old school drink.
Yes.
And it is a fantastic drink. I love the taste of gin. When it was delivered here first, it had 2 lemons in it, which in my view is kind of sacrilege. I had never gotten, but these now have limes. We had to adjust, as we do in the military, adapt, improvise, and overcome. Right. I want you to know that you don't know this, but we got limes to get it right just for you, because I wanted you to be at ease, in part because you've had a heck of a couple weeks, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm going to, our intro will explain to people your background. You're a Marine veteran that's now an investigative reporter that's breaking some of the most important stories in America. And so I want to start with the headline, which is you were the guy who broke the story about the killing of Baghdadi.
Correct.
People have read it in the news. He was the most wanted terrorist alive in the world, the leader of ISIS and the creator of the caliphate.
Yep.
But what people may not know is how an investigative reporter gets to that point. Right. And I think it's very important to start by telling folks that you had the information for a while.
Yeah.
And at a time when people are arguing that the president is arguing the press is an enemy of the people, right. I think it was a demonstration in how the press is not the enemy of the people, the opposite. And you were demonstrating tremendous professionalism. You kept our boys and girls safe to some extent because you had information about this attack and you were holding it. But take us through as best you can without, obviously disclosing any sources. I mean, how did you come to that story? And then take us through that release of the story that told the world that American Delta Force operators had killed Baghdadi.
Yeah, sure. I mean, to get to this point in my career, it's not. I'm not some sort of great journalist or in terms of like, it really is just continuing to work my beat and putting out good stories. When I started in journalism, I covered suicide and suicide prevention and legislation. And back when you were at IAVA, those were my first stories as I was just beginning. But it's because I stayed on that beat and continued to just do good, just basic reporting, and even stories that didn't get much attention. Sources were out there paying attention, and they started coming to me as where I didn't have to go to them. And so from just years of good reporting, basically, it's been such a crazy week or so since Baghdadi was killed. But I was told, keep your phone charged and stay available. I'm gonna have breaking news for you. And I was like, I had no idea what it was. And then as the operation started going down, I started getting more and more information. But as a former U.S. Marine and also a journalist who, to me, the number one ethic in journalism is do no harm. And that's do no harm physically, and it's also do no harm in terms of like, I'm not there to make anyone to lose their job or lose their financing or being able to put food on the table. And so that's always at the forefront. Anytime I get a story, it's like, is this going to cause harm to someone? And, guys on an operation, especially as the one to go and take out Baghdadi, and as top secret as that is, the last thing they need is a reporter, putting information out there that's going to compromise what they're doing. Especially because, when they were coming in, they took small arms fire on the way in. And then we learned that people have suicide vests. And so it was an incredibly dangerous situation, so I sat on it. There was no need. But I do that even with stories that are not, they're national news, but they don't get a national attention. Like anytime a new someone gets killed in Afghanistan or killed in Iraq, I usually have the name of the person before the Department of Defense ever releases the name. And I sit on it because it's not a story that, one, my biggest fear has always been that a family member learns about the death of a loved one from a story that I wrote. So there's no reason to jump the gun in terms of the Defense Department just putting out that information. There's just certain stories, like there's certain etiquette, So, I just sat on it, and, it was a responsible thing to do.
And every question I ask you will be, grounded in if this, endangers your sources or anything else, please don't answer or say
Right.
no. But unpacking all of that, you say do no harm. That might not be every journalist's mission, right? You consider that your mission. Others might say, you know what, the truth has to get out no matter what. And especially in this environment where journalistic standards are kind of bouncing all over the place.
Right.
These sources are, I know, coming to you because they trust you. I was a source for you, right? Yep. I came to you with information because I trusted you. I knew you had you would treat confidential or sensitive information with respect, with cultural competency, with context, and I know your sources did the same. But how long did you sit on it?
Hours.
And in those hours, you know that other reporters might have the same information.
Correct.
And you make that choice I want to deconstruct this for people who might be less familiar with journalism or military operations. You don't want to disclose this information too early. Why? For the very most basic people who may not understand.
To not get anyone killed. That it gets that basic. If for whatever reason, because I don't know exactly where they are in the operation. So let's say hypothetically, I put out a story and they haven't gotten to the target building yet where they're going to take out Baghdadi. And my story tips them off and Baghdadi escapes. And in that process, someone gets killed. It's that basic.
Maybe to stretch it out with great, if you said this unit was coming into this region with this many helicopters at this time, and the enemy reads it on Newsweek.com before they get there, they know how to prepare for those types of people, those types of aircraft, that timing, right? It's basically
right.
they can be ready, right? You can give them advanced information that could literally have them laying in waiting and endanger U.S. forces.
That's absolutely right. It was the same reasons. The same thing. It's no different when the New York Times and the Washington Post got sued by the government for the first time in history with the Pentagon Papers. And I think we saw that in the movie with Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep where the judge asks, well, would you publish the plans for D-Day? And they're like, well, no, because that's an operation and could get someone killed. The Pentagon Papers were not operational plans. They were a document. It was a historical document in terms of like what went wrong in the Vietnam War. Right. And so the argument didn't hold up. But it's no different. Journalists, despite some of the criticisms we're getting nowadays, there are still people who adhere to those ethics, and it goes back to do no harm. But it's also there's a part of journalism that is very competitive. You brought it up. Like, did I worry that the New York Times had it? Of course they do. They're the New York Times. Why wouldn't I think that they would have it? Or the Washington Post. I always think of myself as like, almost like a freelance journalist. Even though I work at Newsweek now, I've always considered myself as like the underdog, where if I have this information, someone else probably has it. So I don't ever consider myself like, oh, well, of course I have this information.
But you're very scrappy, James, and I think people trust you because they know you have integrity, and because they know you also understand how to handle classified information. You were in the Marine Corps, and I want you to talk about that later.
Okay.
But just let's go deeper on this actual story. So you get this information from a source.
Yep.
Then what do you do? Do you know that source? Can you confirm that source? How do you know it's good? How do you know it's real?
Right. So we start writing the story, start getting background on Baghdadi. It was very hectic behind the scenes. But my job is Tom O'Connor. I wrote the story with Tom O'Connor. He's writing all the background on Baghdadi and stuff like that. I'm trying to find further confirmation. Is there other sources that I can talk to that can confirm this? So that's what I start doing.
And you're burning up the phones. And now in this world, what people may not realize is how often reporters and sources interact on social media. So it could be DMs on Twitter, could be Facebook messages, could be WhatsApp or other more secure. Signal, right, is another one that some folks use.
I mean, that gets into my sources and methods, so I can't talk about that.
I'm just saying the variety
yes,
that exists.
That does occur in journalism. And you even have to be even more sort of careful now because there is sort of a crackdown on whistleblowing. And that's not mutually exclusive to this administration. That was the previous administration. Right. So, I mean, that's nothing new. But, I mean, journalism would not exist without sources. I mean, we'd be mockingbirds. We'd be sort of repeating just what the government says. And so, I mean, sources are incredibly brave. They take all the risk in the information that they give us. But every source that I've come across, and every source has motivations and intentions, and journalists need to be aware of that. But I've been pretty lucky. Anytime I've questioned their motivations or questioned their intentions, and I've straight up asked them, like, why are you bringing me this information? It's always because the American people deserve to know. And these are the same sources, when I do ask them certain information, they won't divulge it because it is classified and it is information that they don't feel the American people should know. So even the sources themselves are careful. I've been incredibly fortunate that every source that I've come across, it's always been, this is something the American people should know, and the government's not going to tell them.
And there was a history, especially after World War II, of veterans, military veterans, who continued, they viewed it as an extension of their service to work in journalism. And I've heard you talk about that before, but, you are trusted. And you can also call bullshit. When a general is doing a dog and pony show because you've been an enlisted Marine on the other end of it, right? So, in the history of Joey Galloway, maybe, right, is maybe one of the most famous. Joey Galloway was so trusted by Hal Moore, and We Were Soldiers Once and Young. There have been others. Even Hackworth was kind of an advocate journalist, Colonel David Hackworth. Yep. But were there older veterans and journalists, either or, that served as kind of an inspiration or role model to you?
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, Joey Galloway, one of the only journalists I know of that has the Bronze Star as a journalist. I mean, just absolutely crazy. And then, Hackworth actually worked for Newsweek. The guy's got like 10 silver stars, which is just unbelievable. That I when I first looked that up, I was like, that can't be real.
Galloway was attached to Hal Moore's unit.
Correct.
Firefight happens. He picks up a rifle and starts shooting because they're in such deep shape.
And helped run some people to medevac helicopters after the napalm. They called it napalm, and it accidentally took some of our U.S. soldiers out. I mean, Galloway's line about, I saw them dancing in the fire, like, it's so very vivid. But and then Hackworth actually worked for Newsweek. When I first came in transitioning from the Marines to journalism, Chris Shivers over at the New York Times, Marine infantry officer, served. He got deployed to the L.A. riots, actually, like back in like '92. He was a great inspiration. I mean, I think he's got like 2 Pulitzers now.
C.J. Shivers.
Yeah, CJ. Yeah, he goes by C.J. Shivers, but people know he's Chris.
And he brought back At War at the New York Times.
He brought back At War.
A fantastic book called The Rifle, is it, or The Gun?
Yeah.
And he's
you talked about the AK-47. Yeah.
Yeah.
What a lot here. This is a little bit of a reveal. A lot of people don't know this. I quit therapy for a while at a certain point. I was just very frustrated with therapy, and I reached out to him, and he actually got me back into therapy. A lot of people don't know that. And that wasn't him being a journalist or him being a mentor. It was him really just wanting to care for a fellow veteran. And because I told him I was struggling with a very, very specific memory, which I've talked about before. And he actually reached out to a whole bunch of people on Facebook and got me back into therapy. So yeah, I mean, he's been a true friend, and others too. I mean, even like Dan Lamuth of the Washington Post. I was a nobody writer, and Dan Lamuth gave me my first byline at the Washington Post, and Laura Diamond, who's Jamie Diamond's daughter, actually, of J.P. Morgan. She was my first editor and taught me, what inverted pyramid was. And so most of my journalism.
What is inverted pyramid?
Yeah, well, you put the news at the top, and but I mean, a lot of my journalism foundation comes from just being not afraid to talk to people and ask for help, and seeking guidance, and people have been very generous in terms of their time and advice to me. I've been more successful in my journalism career because of just reaching out and asking them how did they do it versus journalism school. Or I mean, I got I was a minor in journalism, but I actually dropped out of college. I'm shy like 3 credits in Spanish or something like that. But
so tell us, for folks who don't know your work, and I'll do a bit in the intro, but tell us about your Marine Corps service, how you ended up in the Marine Corps, and then how you ended up from there in journalism.
Absolutely. Can I tell you a quick story? I've been wanting to tell you this for years. I don't think I've ever told you this. Yeah, and what, again, people might not know, this is the first time we're meeting, but we've known each other for years. There was a running joke that we had about I would come into work, and I was an infantry squad leader at the time. And any time the Marine Corps has this, especially at the lower levels, some of the things that they have younger enlisted Marines do is very stupid, for lack of a better term. And I'd come into work and I'm like, hey, what are we doing today? And his response was always, we're gonna roll a donut, which is a reference to the Green Zone, which is the whole scene about we were rolling into all these different places looking for WMDs, and we keep rolling a donut. And that became like a running joke in our company. It was code for, we're going to do something stupid today that doesn't make any sense. We keep rolling a donut. There's a disconnect. Just throw things out there. So all of that from your movie with Matt Damon became like code in our battalion for we were going to do something stupid today.
I did not know that. I didn't know. So for folks that don't know, a long time ago in a galaxy far away, I got a call from a producer who actually used to be at 60 Minutes, who then ended up working with Paul Greengrass, who then ended up working with Matt Damon and did a film based off Rajiv Chandrasekaran's book, The Green Zone.
Yep.
It was actually called like Life in the Emerald City or something like that, right? And then it became Green Zone with Matt Damon, which was kind of like Jason Bourne more than it was the reality of Iraq. But me and they basically called us up and walked in and said, hey, we're doing a movie with Matt Damon. Can you help us find veterans? And we were like, yeah, we could do that. And we did an open casting in New York. And they literally had a conference room, and veterans just walked in and told their story. And they took, I think, about a dozen of them.
Wow.
And a dozen of the guy, Jerry LaSala, Ed Gluck, Paul, a bunch of other guys, or probably over a dozen of them are actually in the film as, supporting characters. Huh. And they have an amazing story to tell, where they went to, I think, Morocco for a couple of months, then they went to England for a couple of months. When we actually shot that scene, it was in a racetrack, a dog racetrack in England, but they repurposed it to look like Baghdad International Airport. I had one line, and they originally had me in the script as General Gonzalez. Huh. And I was like, I'm way too young to be a general, and maybe I could be named Gonzalez. Unlikely. So they downgraded me to Major Gonzalez based off my guidance. And, that was my big moment with Matt Damon. But here's the cool part. They did actually care about the authenticity, and they cared about having us involved. And in some ways, vets are awesome. The makeup people used to tell us all the time how great we were because we didn't complain. We didn't complain about makeup. We didn't complain about not eating. We didn't complain about the heat. And they were used to dealing with actors who were kind of divas. But I want to come back to what's a related story, which is your work on This Is Us on NBC with my friend Milo Ventimiglia. But just to go all the way back, James, you get the Baghdadi story.
Yep.
Now it's kind of unfolded. What do you think is the most important part of the Baghdadi story?
Where is ISIS now? There have been some analysis out there about how even though Baghdadi's death is absolutely symbolic and sends a message, there is some speculation how much of command and control he still had over ISIS as a group. And ISIS is, there's affiliates all over the world. There's now, you have ISIS in Afghanistan, which has historically never been a problem in Afghanistan. So right now it's where is ISIS right now, and what does their command and control structure look like in terms of their hierarchy with Baghdadi being gone? Is it more symbolic or is it, does it actually filter down into how they are decentralized throughout the world? And that's sort of what I'm wondering about. It's a very hard question to answer. But to me, it always goes back to ideology. And that's always been one of the issues with the global war on terrorism is it's a war on ideology and not so much war on a country. And ideology is very difficult to root out, which keeps people in perpetual war.
Yeah, so the reference earlier to Hal Moore is maybe more apt than I thought at the time, because there's a scene in We Were Soldiers Once and Young where they're getting off the helicopter and they're training. And he says, boom, you're dead, you're in charge, what do? You hesitated, boom, you're dead, you're in charge, right? And there was this idea that everyone had to be ready to lead.
Right.
And I think those of us who've been in the military know that you knock off Baghdadi, there are more people waiting.
Correct.
Right, there is a farm team. And as much as Trump wants to celebrate, this victory, which is a victory, right? Whether or not it's a strategic change of the landscape, we'll see, right? If you knocked out one of our generals, there are plenty of other generals that are ready to take their place. The question is, was he more than that, right? Is he a symbolic leader, a spiritual leader, a strategic leader that is irreplaceable? And it's definitely not the end of ISIS, right? Your reporting has shown that this is not going away because we took out Baghdadi, despite what the president might say.
Correct. Yeah. It is true that President Trump is being a little disingenuous in terms of taking all the credit for the decimation of ISIS. That started under President Obama and then it went into President Trump. So actually, both presidents deserve credit for that. But yeah, absolutely. To me, it's no different than when we took out bin Laden in 2011. Al-Qaeda is still around, especially still in Afghanistan. And there's actually debate over how, the government's viewpoint on Al-Qaeda, and you can trace this all the way back to like 2007, which I have, and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has jumped on this train, which is, Al-Qaeda is a skeleton of its former self. That's usually the terminology they use. But I think I'm very worried about that statement because it makes it gives the impression that that they've been defeated and they're not still dangerous.
Yeah.
And that we shouldn't still worry about them because they're a skeleton of their former self. But we've been saying that since 2007. And Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said it this year, especially in Afghanistan. He was talking about Afghanistan and the withdrawal. But there are indications that both the Al-Qaeda and the Taliban still work together in Afghanistan, even after 18 years after 9/11. So they might still be a skeleton, but they're still capable.
Right. And the Baghdadi mission itself, James, when you were reporting that and sitting on the information, and then very quickly thereafter, Trump tweets the night before, on Saturday night, he says, I have big news.
Yes.
When he tweeted on Saturday night, I have big news, did you know what he was tweeting about?
Yes.
And you had the information at that point, you were still holding it?
Correct.
So what time did he tweeted that 8, 9 o'clock at night?
Yeah, it was like 9 something, and then I think we finally reported like 10:30, 10:45, somewhere around there.
And you were,
and the reason is I wanted further confirmation that the U.S. forces were out of airspace. I had been told that they were off the that they were out of the airspace when the president tweeted, but I wasn't comfortable with one source. I wanted further confirmation just to make sure.
So once your story runs, He does a press conference at 9 o'clock or so the
following
next morning, right?
Yeah.
Did he disclose anything in the press conference in terms of details that you did not in your story because you were worried it would endanger our troops?
I mean, nothing off the top of my head that I can think of. I'd have to go back and watch it. Because you really have to analyze like down to the word of what they're saying.
Right.
I know, like everyone's talking about the dog right now. There's a reason why. Like first of all, the capabilities of the dog I would never publish. Because those are, and my sources actually would never tell me, because I've asked. But anytime I know I'm getting close to very sensitive things, I always ask, like, can this be published? Is this okay? But actually my sources wouldn't give up the dog's name. It was only after the president tweeted that they gave up the name. It was because at that point they said there's no reason to hold on to the name. So if the president had never tweeted the dog's picture, I would have never gotten the name of the dog. And then once I got the name, I was like, is this going to expose the team at all? And they were like, well, no. Like, that's ridiculous. And then every Pentagon official that I've talked to after that, I mean, they'll argue operational security, but the idea that you're going to figure out who the dog handler is or individuals by the name of the dog is absolutely ridiculous from everybody that I've talked to.
So let's break this. Let's break this apart for folks that maybe didn't get into all these details. So the Baghdadi story is released on Sunday morning. Trump puts this out there and got a lot of criticism, I think rightly so, for talking about Baghdadi whimpering and crying, which no one could substantiate. He also was very specific in saying our helicopters came in low and they didn't go through the front door, they went in the side. And, Delta is not even a unit that the government officially recognizes.
Correct.
Right? Everybody reports on it. It's commonly known. But if you ask the government, does Delta Force, the elite unit within the Army Green Berets, exist, they have not publicly admitted that they exist, right?
Right.
So this is a unit that we have not publicly existed, and he's divulging pretty, close to details that most folks kind of made us cringe. So I want to get to the dog story in a second, James, but are people at the Pentagon worried he's going to spill the beans? Like, you have a lot of sources, people who work in the Pentagon who are on active duty. Do they trust the president with confidential, with top secret information?
No. I mean, everyone I've talked to, no. For the most part, no. But I think their fears come out of the same fears that under President Obama when they allowed access for which made Zero Dark 30. It was the same sort of fears. Both Delta Force and SEAL Team 6, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, like, they would prefer not to be in the news. As much as we joke about Navy SEALs writing books and movies and stuff like that, when they're active, like they don't want the limelight. And so even what's interesting is originally when we reported members of the Joint Special Operations Command, even though I knew it was Delta Force, and only after I confirmed with a couple of sources, like, is it okay to say it was Delta Force, that they said okay, that I then changed it to members of Joint Special Operations Command to Delta Force. So I was even very careful about not, when my story broke, the original story says only members of Joint Special Operations Command, because that's usually what the government does. But yeah, they're absolutely worried that the president might, but I think they're worried for the same reasons that they were worried with the Obama White House allowing too much access to Catherine Bigelow and Mark Bowl. It's the same thing. They want to be seen. They want to stay out of the news.
Same thing, but it's not, right? Like, it's a higher risk now, right? Like,
well, yeah,
and I think that I was critical.
Sorry.
I was critical of the Obama administration. I think they put out too much detail constantly, right? And some of it maybe was enthusiasm. Some of it was that they were less experienced in government, right, and less experienced around national security. And I think many details that could potentially damage us tended to flow out of the Obama White House. But Trump is a lot more sloppy, right? Like, Trump might tweet it.
Yeah.
So it's a whole nother level now than it was under the Obama administration.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the story. There was one particular story where it was something the president tweeted. I'm trying to remember what it was. It might have dealt with Erdogan, President Erdogan of Turkey. But it was, I remember as soon as he tweeted something, some of my sources was like, I can't believe he tweeted it. Mm-hmm. He's like, you know what it was? I'm sorry. It wasn't Erdogan. It was when he called off the Afghan deal. So we're about to pull out of Afghanistan. And they that week they had a soldier killed, and President Trump tweeted out something that basically called off the deal. And it killed my sources, just killed them, because they're like, well, I mean, that throws away the game almost in their viewpoint. That's what it was. Is his tweets have become foreign policy, and not only foreign policy, we've even seen it to where the White House and the Defense Department have not been on the same page. So when he announced the transgender ban in the Defense Department, the Defense Department had no clue that was coming. Secretary Mattis at the time completely caught off guard. So was the rest of the Defense Department. And they had to quickly scramble to get onto the same page as the White House. Most public affairs officers that I talked to, there was a period, and it literally just ended when Defense Secretary Esper came in, but there was a period where, I mean, we didn't have a Pentagon press briefing for over a year. The real reason was that is they were living in the shadow of the White House, and they feared that any messaging that they put out, they would be immediately undercut by the messaging coming out of the White House. And because they couldn't get on the same page with the White House in terms of what the White House wanted the Defense Department to do, they just stopped holding press briefings.
I'm glad you brought this up, because I've been eager to dig deeper with you on this. We talked a little bit about on the radio. I've talked to Barbara Starr and others about this. But for over 300 days, you maybe you know the exact number, over 300 days, the Pentagon did not do a public press briefing.
Right. It was over a year.
Over a year.
Over a year.
And that is, in my view, an erosion of the confidence that the American people have in our Pentagon to tell us what's happening, right? You don't have to tell us that, Johnny from North Carolina just got off the plane in Afghanistan, but we need to generally know what's happening. I mean, they weren't, on a very basic level, where they were not only sharing information from combat zones, they weren't even standing up and telling us the names of casualties.
No. I mean, you can go back to Vietnam. In Vietnam, it was the 5 o'clock volleys, and every day they would have a press briefing in Saigon and tell you exactly what the military was doing that day. In the Gulf War, it was called the 4 o'clock volleys. They tell you the same thing, what they were doing that day in the Gulf War. And I wrote an article about Afghanistan as related to sort of the void in Pentagon press briefings. I called them the 0 o'clock volleys, because you couldn't even get basic information about what is going on in Afghanistan, what's going on in Iraq. Just basic details, not operational, that would divulge operational security concerns, or they just weren't talking. Right. And today, where it really happens today, and we just had the Military Reporters and Editors Association where we complained to the Pentagon press chiefs. What really happens today is the southern border. The southern border is one of the most secretive Pentagon missions right now, and I have no idea why. I had a public affairs officer call me after the last story I put out, because I'd obtained sort of the legal language that they were using for the border, and I had a public affairs officer call me, and they told me, that's operational security. You're divulging where Marines are. I'm like, I said, yeah, they're in Texas, and they're in Arizona, and they're in California. If I can drive to where the troops are, I don't think that's a secret, and I'm not sure why this is such a big secret, and why U.S. Northern Command, who oversees the border mission, they don't allow embeds. They don't allow reporters to go down there.
James, is it because so many in the Pentagon feel it's political? I mean, it's at a time where Trump has taken $3.6 billion away from the Pentagon budget, away from military schools, away from hazardous material disposal units, away from firehouses on military bases, and taken $3.6 billion and instead spent that money on extending the wall by, I don't know, a couple hundred miles, right, out of thousands potentially. Right. So this is very controversial, right? I think most people, I believe it's political. I believe it's politicizing the military on another level. Is that part of why the military is so reluctant to share this, because they've never been in a situation like this before? Right. Where in some ways the Pentagon has become a political piggy bank for Trump's political whims.
Right. So most of the sources that I've talked to before anytime they really considered it political in terms of people I talked to at the Pentagon was when he announced that there was an invasion, a caravan invasion just before the midterms. They felt that he was only doing that for political reasons. And I know this because is that what the rhetoric coming out of the White House was not matching up with the intelligence assessments. Now, these intelligence assessments were unclassified, and I published them. And I think Rachel Maddow did a big piece about it. But basically, the military is more concerned about unregulated militias operating on the border than they were the caravan of migrants coming towards the border. It was characterized by the White House.
Meaning civilians with guns running around, these wannabe whatever they are that might accidentally shoot a Marine who's standing there doing his duty on a post.
Correct.
They were more concerned about them than they were about this, caravan, this menace thing that Trump had created.
Correct. Yeah. Despite what the White House was saying at the time, there was no intelligence to support the idea that terrorists were coming across the border. There was no intelligence to support the idea that there was an invasion or that there was transcriminal organizations within the caravan. But if you look at the intelligence reports, which you can read, I mean, we published them back in October, is that it was all militias that they were mostly concerned about.
So I want to pause for a second, James, and you are working every day to protect these sources. You and many others are demanding public information from the Pentagon, from the White House, and the president calls you the enemy of the people. You are a Marine Corps veteran. You are, someone who really, I think, upholds a high standard of integrity in the profession you've chosen. How do you feel when President Trump calls you the enemy of the people?
It doesn't feel good. I mean, to be honest, if you ever get an email from me, there's a quote that I have at the bottom. I don't know who said it, but it says, quality journalism is just as important to the survival of democracy as the armies guarding its borders. And I really do feel like that. Like I said, I've always felt that journalism is an extension of my military career, and both are enshrined in the same document. Military members swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and journalists is the only job that is protected in that Constitution, because the rights a free press will not be infringed. And the reason why it won't be infringed is so the American people can know what is going on in their name. It seems as if too often, that the U.S. government forgets that their power is derived from the people, and that every government document created is the people's. It's not the government's. The people own those documents. So anytime I submit tons of FOIAs, Freedom of Information Acts, and I always get told that, oh, you're going on a digging expedition. Like, why are you after these documents? It's because they're not yours. They're the people's. And the people have the right to see what those documents are and what you're saying in their name. Everything is done in the people's name because that's where the power comes from. So when I'm told that I'm the enemy of the people, I almost don't even want to acknowledge it because it's completely. I don't even know how to respond to it because it's like that. It's so far from the truth. I'm at a loss for words. I don't even know. Like, it's like someone telling me like that you don't care about your country. Right. It's like, well, that's ridiculous.
Right.
So it's like I just can't put much faith into it.
So in this environment, James, what's more dangerous, being a Marine like you were deployed overseas, or being a journalist now here at home?
I mean, I'm still gonna say the Marines overseas. I mean, they're still taking the risk.
But you feel, you're an investigative reporter. You're breaking stories about the White House.
Yeah.
This atmosphere the president has created, where people are threatening journalists, are sometimes attacking journalists. What's that like for you, having been on both sides of it?
It's incredibly disheartening. I mean, I get death threats all the time. I've gotten death threats from white supremacists who are supportive of the president, and to me, I'm a middle of the road person. I don't really mind someone who is supportive of President Trump or President Obama. You know, I really I always try to be very fair to the president, but in terms of like I never like when people just call him Trump. I do like when he's President Trump, but with that said, his rhetoric is not. It's doing a disservice to democracy and to what happens when he leaves the White House. That's what I'm most concerned about. When he leaves the White House, we're still polarized as a nation, and presidents, I feel, and people can debate on how much or how little they've done this, but presidents should be, once they come into office, unite the country. And I don't know how united we're going to be when President Trump moves on from the office. We're still going to be left with our own devices. We're still going to be at each other's throats. That's what concerns me. To me, I've never understood, people are very concerned about party, either Republican or Democrat. And I've always been, well, if it's a good idea, it's a good idea. What does it matter where it comes from? If it's a Republican idea or if a Democratic idea, as long as it's benefiting the people. Again, benefiting the people who put you in power. I've never understood why party matters.
I think a lot of people who follow this show will agree with you. We have a huge part of our audience that's unaffiliated and independent or just fed up. But to that point, a question I ask of all our guests, James Laporta, what makes you angry?
The Baghdadi story is here on the totem pole. It's at the very lowest in terms of what I find important. And I was actually thinking about, like what do I consider important stories? It was probably the story I did yesterday or the day prior. We lost 2 sailors to suicide last week. That didn't get near enough attention as it should have. We have a huge suicide problem in the military. We have a huge sexual assault problem in the military. There's 112 sexual assaults every day in the military, statistically. That adds up to a battalion real quick. That, to me, will always be the most important story, despite Baghdadi. And I don't mean to diminish what those soldiers did to take out Baghdadi, and I understand the international importance of that story. But to me, it's I always start at people. And it's a gut punch every single time I get this news about another sailor being lost to suicide. And it's not like the military is not trying to do something, but it doesn't seem like there's a clear answer. And I just wish that story would have gotten the same amount of attention as the Baghdadi story. To me, that's what's always been more important.
And I think you deserve a lot of credit. You've been tenacious also. There's so many different issues you've covered. You covered the border. You've covered operations overseas. You've covered what's happening in Afghanistan when it was Afghanistan, when many people weren't paying attention to it. And you've covered the suicide story, in the veterans and military community consistently. You've been, I think, the first to break a number of stories about suicides on VA facilities, or at least you've added insight to that story and some of the data that's come out from inside that I think is underreported. But when you take a bigger step back, James, and look at this atmosphere, the story that got the most attention this week is the dog, right?
Right.
And the seriousness of it is, it's kind of a funny story, but it's also kind of a serious story. But there's an old saying, I think, that if you put a dog in the title, your book will end up in the New York Times bestseller list like 100 times more. Like if you look on the New York Times bestseller list, there's almost always a story about a dog, a book about a dog, right? Dog. We used to have a line at IVA, babies, puppies, and vets. Everybody loves babies, puppies, and vets. No one wants to speak ill of babies, puppies, or vets. And if you did so politically, it's suicide, right? You don't want to be the candidate who comes up and says, I don't give a shit about puppies, or I don't give a shit about babies. You wrote the story right after you break the Baghdadi story. Right. Within 24 hours, you break the story about the dog that was on the mission. I have been around a wide spectrum of working dogs in different special operations units and even in the veterans community. I have been overwhelmingly impressed by them, right? And that's not to be dismissed.
No.
But tell us about the dog story. Tell us what you got and tell us what you were able to get first. And for people who maybe didn't hear the news, what's the story about the dog?
Dog was on the mission into Syria. Again, I don't want to give away what the dog does specifically, because that's very important. That goes speaking to capabilities of our special operation forces.
The dog's like a weapon system, essentially.
Correct. They are a weapon system. They're more of a weapon system than they are a dog, in that regard. I've worked with dogs as well in Afghanistan, to finding IEDs and stuff like that. They're incredibly brave, and all they want to do is please. But yeah, this dog went in. He was wounded.
He or she? Is it a she?
So
we confirmed the gender?
Yes. So initially we were told a she, and then further confirmation was that it was a male, and that's what the Washington Post is reporting as well. So right now it's a male. I'm hearing rumors that there's supposed to be a Pentagon press briefing later today, where they're going to release like the dog's name and the photographs and and pictures and stuff like that and videos from the raid. I don't know how much they're going to release. And I don't even know if they're going to have it's a rumor that's right now that they might have a press briefing, but the dog, it got wounded. But like I said before, I couldn't get the dog's name. And in journalism, we use sort of the same thing. A story is not that a dog bites a man. A story is a man bites a dog. That's a news story. Or you always get the dog's name if a dog is involved in a news story. So, I mean, that's just what journalists have always been taught.
Everybody wants to know.
Right.
People want to know.
And when I started asking, they're like, well, the name is classified. And I'm like, what? I was like, are you being serious? I couldn't tell if they were being serious with me or not. They're like, yeah, it's classified. But once the president tweeted out the photo, they were like, there's no reason to hold the name. And I don't know if they're using classified genuinely, like actual classification in terms of secret and top secret, or if they were using classified in terms of like its operational security.
So James, what is the name of the dog?
It's Conan. And my follow-up question was the barbarian or the comedian, and I was told the comedian. I was told that by several people. And then that's when the Conan O'Brien show reached out, and they were like, is that true? I was like, yeah. And so I've been talking with the Conan O'Brien show about like Defense Department reporting, because apparently they were like joking about it in like the writers' room.
It's been a weird week for you, James.
Yeah, it's been a weird
week.
Well, because Conan O'Brien, I mean, he's done a lot of things for the troops, and he's gone overseas, and so, but they were joking about like because the president tweeted out the picture, does he have to go into witness protection now? And my pitch to Conan O'Brien was, you guys should do like the ending of like Goodfellas, where like Henry Hill has to go into witness protection. He comes out like in his bathrobe and has to get.
I'm sure Trump wants to meet the dog. I mean, Trump wants a photo with the dog. Obama had met some of the dogs in the past. I don't know if there are ever photos, but they had to muzzle the dog. I mean, these dogs are intense. They're incredibly well trained, and I don't think anybody wants to risk the dog accidentally biting the president, no matter how unpopular he is. But I'm sure we will find out more about the dog, Conan, over the next couple of weeks. But in a very sincere and serious way, these dogs are incredible. Anybody who's seen them in action understand, if you imagine a situation where Baghdadi is hypothetically running down this cave, and the dog can go first. The dog can go faster. The dog can go lower. The dog can go maybe more ferociously than a human and get there quickly and save American lives. So many of these dogs have served and died in the war on, I'm always reluctant to call it the war on terror, but our post 9/11 wars, and a lot of the rescue efforts afterward at Ground Zero. They're bomb they're everywhere. And the work that the dogs have done is really incredible, and I think they deserve to be celebrated. And I'm glad that your work did that on some level.
Absolutely. I mean, they've saved, I know of countless Marines that they've saved from improvised explosive devices. Yeah. Some of them have have lost their lives. And by them losing their life when the IED went off, it saved tons of Marines. So, I mean, they are really unsung heroes.
So, James, let's talk about This Is Us. Okay. It is one of the biggest shows in America, and it's a primetime show on NBC. It's got Mandy Moore and my friend Milo Ventimiglia, who's done a lot of USO work. His dad, I believe, is a Vietnam veteran. Yep. And the great Tim O'Brien is associated with the show, who wrote The Things They Carried, which I think everybody should read, whether you're a veteran or not. It's just an incredible, maybe the defining piece of work about Vietnam for many people. But what are you doing on the show, and why do you think it's important?
Yeah. So Yeah, Tim O'Brien. Like I said, Tim O'Brien. The reason. I mean, there's a couple of reasons why they brought in Tim O'Brien. He wrote the Vietnam storyline for season 3. One is verisimilitude. The book blends verisimilitude is the blending of fiction and nonfiction, which is exactly what The Things They Carry does. The book that he wrote, that it was nominated for the Pulitzer. But if you read The Things They Carry, you don't know what is true and what is false or just fiction. And that's exactly what This Is Us does. Their storytelling is very similar. If you've ever watched This Is Us, it uses the same thing. We blend fiction and nonfiction. We follow things on an actual historical timeline. So in season 3 of This Is Us, I mean, that's very accurate in terms of there's a scene where someone gets drafted into the military out of Vietnam. That's because the draft rules actually changed in December of 1969. So even down the historical research that the show does is all very accurate. But in terms of how I got involved with the show, I was a fan from the beginning. A lot of people don't know, my father died 2 hours after my son was born, on the same day, and but I had to quickly be a father, and so I didn't have time to. I couldn't process my father's death. A year later, This Is Us comes on, and okay, by this point you should have watched This Is Us. I'm going to spoil it, but it deals with the death of a father. Milo plays Jack Pearson, and he dies, and it's the family sort of how do they move on from that? This pinnacle person in his life, in the family's life. So the show, in a lot of ways, was helping me deal with grieving with my father. But then, in the end of season 2, you find out that Jack's a veteran. And this one scene really, me not being a journalist, but me as James Laporta, the veteran, I really needed to hear this at this particular moment in my life. Jack takes his son Randall to Washington, D.C., and they go to the Vietnam Memorial Wall. And it's the first time you ever learn in the series that Jack is a Vietnam veteran. And Randall is at this moment in his life, he's got a lot of anxiety over going to college. And Jack starts talking about coming home from war and coming home from Vietnam. And he says this thing, it's like, you're going to, when I came home, I couldn't find my balance. And I couldn't find my balance, and I was unemployed, and it just seemed like the world was against me. But then you find your balance. You're going to find it, and you're going to lose it, and then you're going to find it again. And it was just, I needed to hear that. Just me as a veteran. Like I could almost get like choked up talking about it.
Yeah.
Like it was a personal moment that it was just phenomenal. And I actually, it wasn't just me. I was talking to other veterans who were getting the same thing, because there's not many shows that are talking about the Vietnam War, especially nowadays. So it was right after that scene and they go into season 3 of Vietnam that I reached out to the show, and I'm thinking, God, they're getting a lot of stuff right in terms of the depiction of what it's like to come home from war. It's not the stereotypical. Hollywood tends to have stereotypes of veterans. They're either incredibly heroic or they're incredibly broken, and there's to the point where there's no return. But they just achieve this balance where they're an onion. There's layers to these characters. And so I thought there was a deeper story there, and I reached out to the show. And I don't cover Hollywood, so even like trying to figure out how to reach out to the show was actually more difficult than I actually thought. And I was like, yeah, so I don't know how good my investigative skills are, because that was actually very difficult. But I was about to interview Tim O'Brien, and I was about to interview Dan Fogelman, who created the show. And about an hour before the interview, I found out one of my Marines took their own life. And so I get on the phone, and we're talking about war, we're talking about coming home from war, and I completely lost it over the phone. I completely broke down. It's one of the most embarrassing, unprofessional moments of my journalism career. And I was bawling my eyes out, and I was apologizing profusely because I felt it was very unprofessional. It's not my job to start bawling over the phone. But Dan Fogelman reached out to me and said, dude, you're being way too hard on yourself. You're human. Like, don't worry about it. and we stayed in touch, and he brought me out to, I had to go out to LA to cover a story. He brought me by the studio. He wanted me to meet the staff. It was only supposed to be like a 15-minute meeting with the staff. It turned into 2 hours. And after that 2-hour meeting, we were like, we're going to create a character. And that's sort of where we're at now. And then I made the character into a female veteran.
Wow.
For very, very specific reasons, too, for that.
What are the specific, you're a reporter, you will appreciate that. I'm going to press you on that. What are the specific reasons?
The first meeting that we had, so they were going to create a character that was sort of based on my story. I was, at that point, I'd been in therapy for 10 years, and at that point I was able to be an open book and talk. But the reason I wanted to be a female veteran, and actually other people were in agreement in the room, was it was 2 weeks after Shannon Kent died. Shannon Kent was a senior chief petty officer in the Navy. She was on these like high-level classified intelligence missions. She died in January of this year. It was a guy walked in and blew himself up, killed her interpreter, a Green Beret, and a former Navy SEAL who was working for the Defense Intelligence Agency. But what was astounding to me was that what came after, that when we started to report that story, the American people were like, well, women serve in these high-level classified sort of jobs. And for people who report on the military, it's like, well, yeah, like it was not news to us, but it was news to the rest of America. Yeah. And it shouldn't have been. And so that, I was like, well, okay, then there's an issue that female veterans are underrepresented in film, and that's a problem. So the character is not based on Shannon Kent, but inspired, because she does the same job as what Shannon Kent does, and she's inspired by 2 female Marines that I served with who were doing the same job. So
you should not be embarrassed. It's not unprofessional.
Oh,
it's part of what makes you so powerful, man, is that you are open about your emotion and your vulnerability, and I really think it's why people trust you, right? Whether it's a show in Hollywood or a confidential source inside the Pentagon, people know that you're a real person, and I think that is, frankly, sometimes missing in journalism. I'll tell you, at least on my behalf, it really does inspire me how open you've been about yourself and about your feelings and about your own personal story. And it's also an inspiration. That's part of why I wanted you on this show, James, because you are really, I think, inspiring others who've been through a lot, who've gone through a lot, and are now communicating not just your story, but everybody's story. I mean, at your best, you're a storyteller, right? And whether it's telling Shannon Kent's story or Conan the dog story, you're doing a great job of it. But as you think about that, I want to ask you, too, because a lot of folks who are listening, this is a great conversation because it sits in many places at this podcast. It's the intersection of politics and journalism and entertainment and national security, and you sit in all those worlds, and this conversation has spanned all those worlds. But at its core, you're an inspiring guy. You've overcome a lot, and you're a leader. So folks are listening, I think, will draw a lot of inspiration from your story and from your tenacity and from your experience of this last couple of weeks, which is almost, maybe the defining couple of weeks of your young career. You may win a Pulitzer one day, you may win an Oscar one day, and this is a time where, James Laporta became, known to the world. But at its core, James, what makes you happy?
I mean, that's a great question. And I appreciate that. I'm here because of the sacrifices of others. I'll answer your question in a minute, but I wanted to get that out there, that I'm here because people are no longer here. So I stand on their shoulders. But what makes me happy is I love watching Judge Judy. I love watching her like just rip into people. I find it to be absolutely hilarious. I don't know why. I love just people come to the, like, I just, even, I know the whole thing is like a setup, and like, it actually ruined it for me a little, like, to find out like the backstory of like how they get the cases there and all that kind of stuff. But I just find her to be like that guilty sort of like pleasure of like just watching her tear into people like every week.
Testament to your character. That might be the most authentic answer we've ever had to that question on this show.
Well, I used to.
That's the most no shit answer we've had. I love that. I love Judge Judy too. I mean, I really do. I grew up watching Judge Judy, And we've used Judge Judy as a reference point in the last couple of weeks in the show. We talked about the reality show that is the Trump impeachment, and it's almost like Nancy Pelosi is Judge Judy right now over this reality TV
they're very
show.
similar. I had a buddy of mine who I'm so glad I never got this tattoo, but there's part of me that still wants it just because it'd be hilarious. He wanted to get Judge Judy's face tattooed on his like thigh, and behind her would be the American flag, and underneath it would say only Judy could judge me. And I just always thought that would be the greatest tattoo.
Or the worst tattoo.
Or the worst, but hey, who are we to judge?
If we get Scott Campbell back on the show, folks haven't listened to our episode with Scott Campbell, the tattoo guru. I wonder if Scott's ever gotten that tattoo. We can find out when he joins us again. But we have to ask you the last foundational question of this show. James Laporta, when you were growing up, did you grow up in Florida?
Yep.
So when you were growing up in Florida, James Laporta, what was your first car?
My first car was my grandmother's car. It was a 79 yellow Cadillac DeVille. It was a boat. It had yellow leather seats and an 8-track. And I had Elvis Presley. I think I had Hank Williams. And like the windows didn't roll down. And so it was an incredibly miserable car to drive to school. Like I grew up pretty poor. My dad was a truck driver. My mom worked at McDonald's. So we never really had much money. And so my grandmother was like, she was like, oh, you can drive this car. And then, so that was the car I was driving around. It was awesome. It was a boat though to drive. And then, I moved from that to like a Mitsubishi Galant or something.
What year was the car? Do you remember?
I think it was like a 79, 70,
That's a
78,
very
79.
big car.
Oh,
it's
it's
a very
huge.
big car.
Well, yeah, because if I remember correctly, it had like the fins on the back, like
I'm sure it did.
Almost like the Ghostbuster fins, like on the back of that on the hearse. So yeah, it was, but it stood out because of its yellow. But it was almost like it was like that, like it wasn't like a yellow. It was almost like where like the yellow is like faded. Like it just like been through a lot.
Gross yellow.
Yeah, like a gross yellow. And then with the yellow seats and then just 8 tracks. I had 8 tracks and like the radio.
I love it. We might have to do
and the windows didn't go down.
We might have to do a car show at the car club here in New York of all the cars from Angry Americas. We've had such an amazing span of cars, but that's up there, James. That's really up there. So since you mentioned Ghostbusters, my son watched Ghostbusters for the first time this week, which I'm still not sure I should have shown him because some of it's a little scarier than I thought. But Halloween is coming up. Yep. Do you have a Halloween costume, James?
No. But I actually just recently showed my son Ghostbusters too. But I've started with like the real Ghostbusters, like the cartoon version of Ghostbusters. Yes. They came out like the same year that I think the first or second one came out.
You know what your son's going as for Halloween yet?
He's gotten so many costumes this year as gifts that he wants to have the first half of Halloween he'll be Darth Vader, but for like the second half of Halloween he'll be like Spider-Man, and like he wants like costume changes, like he's like some like diva actress or something like that. So like he'll be in like 3 or 4 different like costumes.
I love it. Amazon spoiled the kids a little bit because you can kind of get a costume in 24 hours and you can have multiple costumes. The days of us going to Caldors or Sears and picking one costume are long gone, right?
Yeah. Well, he's also in the best neighborhood because like. Again, I live among 90-year-olds in like almost like a retirement community, so like there's no children.
He's a rock star.
So he gets all the candy. He's like like last year he was the only trick-or-treater, and we got all the candy. It was awesome. There's no competition.
Wow. I there will be a prize, I'm sure, for the first person who listens to it. Someone's going to dress up like Conan the dog.
Oh, yeah.
That's going to be a very popular costume or a very interesting costume. But your son will get lots of candy. I hope he gets lots of gifts. And as is tradition in the show, I want to end our interview with the giving of the gifts.
Oh, whoa.
So this is...
oh, man.
You are an investigative reporter, but you did not investigate enough that this is part of the show. So first, you have some American-made swag from Oscar Mike, the veterans at Oscar Mike. So if you can't figure out anything else to be for Halloween, you can be an angry American.
There we go.
Right? And then next, this is the last real question of the show. We ask every guest. This is a carryover from Easter. We have not adjusted for Halloween. There are 3 colors of Peeps before you, James Laporta: yellow, blue, and pink. Which one do you choose and why?
Yellow, because they're the originals. It's always been yellow. Yellow's always been the original. I'm an old school guy. Like, I like old school things. I like the originals. It's yellow.
That is a very powerful and definitive answer.
Yeah.
And it is the same answer that Sarah Jessica Parker gave. She said that yellow is the OG of Peeps.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's true. Like, I didn't even know they came in other colors. Those other ones are frauds.
You can FOIA where they come from. All right, now lastly, we give each guest an American-made whiskey. Whoa. So this is Colonel Taylor Small Batch. And you are, what was your highest rank in the Marine Corps?
I was a sergeant.
Well, we're promoting you to colonel.
Thank you.
mean, now you're basically a flag grade officer. You're doing flag grade work. And I hope that you enjoy that. It's beyond the pay grade of a corporal in the Marine Corps, but you can enjoy that after you're done trick-or-treating, after you go through this whirlwind. James, in all seriousness, I want to thank you for joining us. You are an inspiring guy. You're doing a tremendous public service. You represent the best of what journalism is all about, the best of what the Marine Corps is all about, the best of what this country is all about. You're a success story, man. To go from where you came from to now be in Hollywood and holding the White House accountable and also treating such important stories with such care and respect and integrity. I'm grateful for your reporting, and I'm grateful for your character, and I'm really excited to watch where you go from here, man.
Thank you. I sincerely appreciate it. It means a lot.
And I wish you a happy Halloween. Are you gonna drive to Florida now? Is that what's gonna happen?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm doing. I'm gonna leave from here to go drive to Florida.
So you're gonna have broken the Baghdadi story.
Right.
You're gonna have broken the Conan the Dog story.
Yeah.
You're advising a Hollywood thing. You're gonna get in your car and drive all the way from New York to Florida.
Straight down I-95. Yeah.
In time for Halloween.
In time for
That might be your biggest challenge so far.
Yeah, I'm gonna make it. I mean, I'll get there.
I know you're gonna
I'm
make
gonna
it.
be high on coffee and Red Bull and like. Do they have Rippets? Can you buy Rippets like on the road? Like,
I'm sure you will find out.
I'll be buzzed, but I'll be there.
And folks should follow you on Twitter.
Yep.
At James Laporta.
I'm at Jim Laporta.
At Jim Laporta,
Yep.
and read you on Newsweek. And I hope you have books coming soon. I hope you're working on some other things.
We'll see. I am. There's a couple things in the works.
I'm not going to ask you to disclose any confidential information about said projects, but I hope that when you do continue to put stuff out, you'll let us know. We are inspired and grateful for you. Angry Americans with James Laporta, the great James Laporta. Follow him, watch him, be inspired by him. Live from here in the New York Classic Car Club. Thanks for joining us, man.
Thank you,
everybody.